When all but one child from the same class mysteriously vanish on the same night at exactly the same time, a community is left questioning who or what is behind their disappearance. I feel like this movie is getting a lot of praise, and a lot of that praise is being met with pushback, with people claiming that now this movie is just overhyped. So really what I want to do today is kind of just break down my thoughts on the film, but also what you can expect going in, and kind of telling you what this movie actually is versus what it was sold as. So to me, what this movie actually is like an investigative chapter style thriller with folklore horror elements sprinkled in. It's not like a straight up horror film like The Conjuring or something like that. You can even see at the end of my last review, I thought this movie was going to be a pure horror fest that would leave me sleeping with the lights on. And despite my expectations not being accurate to what the film was, I had a very good time with this movie. It's not this like wall-to-wall scare gauntlet where every turn has you uneasy and feeling afraid for your life. It's a movie that focuses a lot more on the people in this town and the effect that this mystery and this tragedy has on them. I'm not here saying that this movie wasn't scary or anything like that. There were some genuinely terrifying moments, some jump scares that really did catch me by surprise. But there's a lot of dark humor in this movie and a lot of, like I said, drama. So it doesn't feel like a one-note horror film. This movie is scary, but it's also surprisingly funny. These characters are ridiculously human, and sometimes it's fun to look at us as a society and as people and feel like, yeah, we're kind of dumb sometimes. We make mistakes and not all of them are necessarily flattering. I think horror films in general have that trope of watching people make poor decisions, and I feel like in this movie you do see that these people are flawed in ways that we've seen in real life. So the poor decisions they make don't feel like horror movie tropes. They feel like, I know someone that makes these poor decisions, and it really makes the movie feel grounded in a way that's refreshing and entertaining. So the way the movie tells its story is from character to character, hopping around from different times and points in the story to provide more context and a different point of view of what's going on. I really enjoyed that as a storytelling method. I've also seen the counter argument that it's just a way to withhold information from the audience and it could feel a bit cheap at times. But personally, I feel like the way it was done was super entertaining and just way more engaging, to the point where it didn't really matter if they were using it to withhold information, because with every new character and point of view introduced, I wanted to see what was happening. I never wanted to go back to the character we were just at. I was enjoying where the story was taking me. The movie starts its focus with Julia Garner's character, Justine Gandy. She is like the third grade teacher of the class where all the students disappear. From her perspective, the entire town hates her and thinks that she abducted their children. She's also shown to have a bit of an issue with boundaries and getting too close with the students, which kind of adds to people thinking that she is involved in their disappearance. And outside of school and work, she has a bit of a drinking problem, and she maybe makes bad decisions and doesn't really have a lot of empathy for other people's struggles. And I'm not trying to give too much away, but I want to emphasize that every character in this story feels completely fleshed out. And so when you're spending time with them, you don't feel like any time is wasted, and it's really progressing the story. When it comes to the atmosphere and just like cinematography of this movie, it was absolutely on point. I know this isn't something that everyone really cares about, so I'll keep it brief. The cinematographer for this movie was Larkin Seipel. I'm sorry if I butchered that. But they also did Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of my all-time favorite films. Something about their shooting style is super grainy and real and atmospheric, and I just love it so much. There's one scene that takes place in a dive bar where everything was tinted red with like this neon light, and it just looks so freaking good. And I was taking notes, and I would pray one day that I could just like make anything that looked remotely that nice. But kind of paired up with the atmosphere is the tone of this film. And like I said earlier, it's not straight up horror in this film. There's a lot of dark comedy that kind of took me by surprise. And I feel like, once again, this is where you find some pushback. This movie is straight up hilarious at times, and I feel like that is something that people are struggling to fit into their horror films. There's moments where things are like unintentionally funny, maybe stuff that happens to the characters where it's not necessarily funny to them, but it's funny to the audience watching this unfold. And there's stuff in this movie that is straight up like a goof or gag that, is kind of silly. And I feel like maybe that's rubbing some people the wrong way, because they were sold this horror film with, thriller mystery elements, but the film is giving them something that could be borderline slapstick. I'm not saying it's done poorly. I think all the jokes land. My audience, when I was in the theater, loved every time there was something to laugh at. I loved it as well. But if you're looking for something that is a bit more serious all the way through, this movie will let you down. Like I I said, this movie is kind of split up into chapters, like, you know, for different characters. And some of these characters, their chapters are a lot more comedic than others. Josh Brolin's character is like a grieving father who's like letting the loss of his son really take over his entire life. And his chapters aren't necessarily funny. They're actually pretty dark. And you can see how it's affecting him negatively. But then you have chapters focused on James, played by Austin Abrams, and he's like this, you know, young junkie character. And those scenes are absolutely hilarious. That's another reason why I liked the chapter-based storytelling, is because it creates a nice balance between these shifting tones. But I feel like by the time you get into the third act, the movie has to make a solid decision on where it wants to land the plane and how. And I feel like maybe it kind of leaned a little too comedic and a little too lighthearted for some, especially for a movie that kind of started off very dark, very serious, and very mysterious. When you set up such a strong mystery and kind of give us these really nice breadcrumbs, it's really important with how it's resolved and what that answer to the mystery is. And with a movie that is pretty vague on what its like theme, or at least broad on what its themes are, it's really easy to find yourself in the theater setting up expectations for how it's going to end. Personally, without spoilers, I think this movie ended pretty abruptly. I'm totally fine with the reveal that we got, with the answers that we got, but it's almost like the movie itself kind of teases like it's gonna be some mind-twisting finale, and it's really a lot more straightforward than that. And so that's not really an issue, but once again, it falls into like, what are your expectations? What expectations is the movie setting? What expectations are people setting for each other? And just really understanding that like, it's okay when a movie takes, you know, the easy way out if it's done well. And I think this movie was executed fantastically. If you value a movie having a clean payoff after a very fun journey to get there, then you will have no issues with this movie being overhyped. To kind of simplify it here, if you're looking for a well-balanced movie with some bite and some style, then I would definitely check this one out. And the horror isn't an afterthought, but it comes second to the characters. So if you're being hyped up on this movie on the fact that it's going to be scary, sorry to break it to you, it's not really that. But if you're hearing that this movie is this kind of like character drama that like is very engaging and entertaining, and that's what's getting you excited, then yeah, that's true. That's accurate. Anyway, let me know what you thought of this movie. Oh shit, what the hell?